But here is Peter Caldwell taking us into a place somewhere near Westminster.
Yes, indeed.
How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, it was a really interesting Prime Minister's questions. We're talking a lot about things that really affect people, not about Boris Johnson, not about lying or not lying,
thankfully,
but actually talking about mortgages. And this was quite a say longer than usual clip than we would usually play, but quite an aggressive war of words, really, between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's questions just a few moments ago.
Mr. Speaker, one of the Prime Minister's own MPs says Britain is facing a mortgage catastrophe. Does he agree with her?
And Mr. Speaker, it's also right that we do support those with the mortgages, and this is why the absolute right economic priority is to halve inflation. Because inflation is what is driving interest rates up. Inflation is what erodes people's savings and pushes up prices and ultimately makes them poorer. Now, this is why, a long time before I had this job, I highlighted the importance of tackling inflation. It's why that I said it is never easy to root out inflation, but we will take the difficult and responsible decisions to do so. It's an approach that the IMF has strongly endorsed in their words, and describing our actions as decisive and responsible.
Keir Starmer. Mr. Speaker, I realise the Prime Minister spent all week saying he doesn't want to influence anyone or anything. It was certainly keeping to that with his answer. He knows very well the cause of the mortgage catastrophe. 13 years of economic failure and a Tory kamikaze budget which crashed the economy and put mortgages through the roof. So will the Prime Minister tell us how much the Tory mortgage penalty is going to cost the average homeowner?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as ever, the honourable gentleman isn't aware of the global macroeconomic situation. But let me do. But substantively, let me tell him and the House what we are doing to support those with mortgages. We have deliberately and proactively increased the generosity of our support for the mortgage interest scheme. We've also established a new FCA communal duty which will protect people with mortgages, for example, moving them onto interest-only mortgages or lengthening mortgage terms. And we have spent tens of billions of pounds supporting people with the cost of living, particularly the most vulnerable. But that is the difference between us, Mr. Speaker. While he is always focused on the politics, we are actually just getting on and doing the job.
Well, getting on and doing the job. Interesting, though, because an awful lot of people very, very worked up about this whole mortgage increase that's coming. But, of course, those who don't have mortgages are sitting there going, well, this is why I don't have a mortgage.
Yes, indeed. Or people who perhaps have paid off a lot of their mortgage and aren't worried on, the equity. They've got a lot of equity in their property. Yes, this idea of a Tory mortgage penalty is a phrase I think we're going to hear a lot more of from Keir Starmer. And actually, their war of words kind of slightly continued on this particular matter. We can take a look at this.
And their plight should keep them awake at night, because over the next few years, 7.5 million people are going to be in the same boat, all paying the Tory mortgage penalty, month after month after month. The situation is so dire that repossessions are already up 50%, a total betrayal of the idea that if you work hard, you'll get on. So what's the Prime Minister going to do to make sure more families don't lose their homes?
Mr. Speaker, I know he's reading from his prepared script, but he failed to actually listen to the answer that I gave. Well, I did actually spell out in detail what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. We've increased the generosity of support for mortgage interest scheme. We did that proactively in advance. We've also established a new FCA consumer duty that will protect borrowers, for example, by allowing them to extend their mortgage terms or switch to interest-only mortgages. And we have spent tens of billions of pounds supporting households with living costs. Those are the practical steps that we are taking to help James and other families who are facing these situations. But what I would say, because he mentioned mortgage arrears and repossessions, I am pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, they are actually running at a level today that is below when we entered the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, because of the actions that we're taking. But more importantly than that, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, is that they are also running 3 times lower than the level we inherited from the last Labour government.
That was a bit of a long time ago, that.
Yeah, and well, I know when you're talking about things 13 years ago, but it's also pretty testy, I think, and this idea of a Tory mortgage penalty, this idea that actually Rishi Sunak saying we're doing a lot, well, to people whose mortgages are going up, and tomorrow we're looking at the Bank of England possible mortgage interest rate rise, 13th consecutive rise. We'll see what happens at 12 o'clock tomorrow, so that's pretty interesting as well. But the only other thing I think that was really a highlight of Prime Minister's questions was what Stephen Flynn said.
Yes.
He's
often quite barbed about that,
he's pretty clever, actually, and the SNP leader made this point as well.
But it doesn't need to be like this. It didn't need to be like this. Because mortgage deals in Ireland, they're not sitting in excess of 6%, they're around about 4.5%. Inflation in the euro area, that's not sitting at 8.7%, it's sitting at closer to 6%. Britain is broke. Now, 7 years after their EU referendum, will he finally admit that it was Brexit that broke it?
Mr. Speaker, again, I don't think the honourable gentleman was paying attention earlier. Interest rates in this country are at similar levels to they are in America, in Canada, in Australia and in New Zealand, Mr. Speaker. The rise in inflation and interest rates is a global phenomenon, but that's why early I set out that it was the right economic priority to have to bring inflation down. That's what this government would do, but that requires, Mr. Speaker, that requires difficult and responsible decisions. That's what leadership looks like. I don't think the SNP will ever do the same thing.
Virginia Crosby.
Yes, that is always their Achilles heel, isn't it? Their leadership problem.
Well, indeed. Pretty testy responses there. And, it's interesting, actually, at a different stage, Stephen Flynn also talked about Rishi Sunak telling the truth and made a reference to Boris Johnson and so on, a sort of easy hit. But Rishi Sunak, I think, on the ropes today, I think this mortgage thing is a massive, massive thing for so many people. It's a practical policy that affects so many.
Yes, I think he probably got away with it, I guess, because it's not really their fault, but it kind of is their fault. We'll talk to Alex Salmon about that coming up next. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Caldwell there, political editor at Talk Radio.